reuse code, and thankfully we can create functions in PowerShell. We're going to use the ISE as we learn about functions. So you've seen how we can do things like add numbers together in PowerShell, and if we execute that, then the results display below. What if we wanted to do those same calculations over and over and over again? Well, we could wrap those in a function. And to do that, we simply use the function keyword followed by the name of our function. We'll follow that same verb-noun pattern that's common in PowerShell. And then the only other thing that you need to do is put squiggly braces, an open and a close, around the code that you need to execute or that you'd like to execute. Now, you don't have to indent it like I've done, but I think it makes it easier to read. And that's essentially it. Let's go ahead and run our script, and you'll see that it executed those lines, but it didn't really do anything, did it? Let's try again. Okay, it doesn't seem like it's doing anything. Why is that? Well, it's because the function hasn't actually been called. In order to use the function, you first define it, and then you call it after you've defined it. Now let's go ahead and execute. And you can see that it actually did something. Well, we can execute just this one line since that function is now in memory. Okay, that's fine, but wouldn't it be nice if our function actually accepted parameters rather than having hard-coded values, especially if you're doing calculations? Let's go ahead and adjust our function to be a little bit more realistic and usable. First thing I'm going to do is change my name. And then the next thing we'll want to do is we'll want to pass some parameters to this function. The way that you pass parameters, or you define them, there's different ways to do it, but one way of doing it is simply saying param is the first line inside your function, and then defining what you're actually sending over in the form of variables. In this case, I'm going to be explicit about my data types. You don't have to be. This will require that it's an integer, though. And we'll say num1, and then comma separate it, and say num2. Now we have these variables available to us, and we can simply call them num1 plus num2 and get rid of this. And now let's go ahead and execute the entire script, see what that does. What you'll see here is that it actually executed something, and executed the do something function. Let's go ahead and run that. We still have that in memory from before, but we've actually changed our function, so we need to change the call to it here. Let's go ahead and re-execute. Okay, we got 0. Why is that? Well, any variables are going to initialize, any number of variables are going to initialize to 0 if you don't specify the parameters. And so we have num1 that's 0 and num2 that's 0. We add those together and we get 0. So we need to pass some parameters. Well, you might be tempted to do something like this and put a comma in between, but you don't do that in PowerShell. You actually pass your parameters with just spaces. So there's no parentheses or other things. It's just the function, space, first parameter, space, second parameter, etc. And you can see that our call to the function produced the expected result. Now, if we wanted to be a little bit more explicit, what we could do is we could actually name the parameters that we wanted to pass, and we do that by hitting a dash here, and you can see that we can specify num1 as 1, 2, 3, and num2 as 4, 5, 6, and we can execute that, and we get the result we expect. We could also switch it around, though, and we could say, well, num2 is 4, 5, 6, and num1 is 1, 2, 3, and we'll execute that, and we get the same results with the appropriate variables being set. Now, so I guess a couple of things to learn from this. One, you can provide parameters in the order that they're specified within the function, or if you want to change the order, then you can explicitly call the parameter name and then supply the value after that. You often will actually call functions and pass parameters by using the name if you're only specifying a subset of the parameters. For instance, we might just specify num2, we'll run that, and num1 gets initialized to be 0. Well, let's say we wanted to use this as a function and assign the result to a variable. We might do something like this. Is this going to work? Let's go ahead and run the entire thing. Let's go ahead and output our result. And indeed, it does work. That actually is a little bit surprising because usually this will just write out straight to the host. But in this case, if it's written in a function, then everything that's written out is returned as part of that function. It's probably better that we're a little bit more explicit about what we want to return by using the return keyword. This will allow us to determine what we actually want to return. Of course, we can go and reuse our function many times. Let's go ahead and use positional parameters 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, and we'll simply concatenate all of the results together, and then we'll display out the result. There you have it. Functions are pretty easy to write. You simply use the function keyword, you name it, you pass parameters, and you return the results. Well, this function isn't super interesting. We'll get to some more interesting ones soon. I've just cleared out my PowerShell environment.